We are continuing in the laws of Shema, and we've been talking about making sure that the place where we engage in prayer and in reciting the Shema and other holy things are kept appropriate and kept holy and meant to properly apply Kedusha to the Kodesh. You have to have a holy place to have holy things in it. So we're continuing in this discussion. So we already said to keep things that are things like excrement and urine out of there. Make sure the little kids don't come in with dirty diapers on. Make sure the adults are have clean clothing and are appropriately attired, and the place is sanctified. It's not a gross place to work or to pray. Everything has to be clean and clear. Keep your bathrooms locked up and put away from everybody. It should be very, very holy. Okay, because we learned initially several weeks ago when we started these things back in Ayin Daled and Ayin Hey in 74 and 75, V'haya machanecha kadosh, that your place of dwelling should be holy, in order that Hashem should be able to dwell in that place as well. So it should be a holy place. So we're going to do 81 and we're going to do 80 and 81. And we'll see about getting in how far we get into 82 as well. We'll probably get those done. They're all very short. So we're going to talk now about the laws of one who is unable to keep themselves from flatulating. Okay, we've already discussed that having disgusting things around, such as excrement and urine, is inappropriate. Disgusting smells are inappropriate. So here's also another case of a disgusting smell that would not be appropriate to have in shul. Shulchan Aruch says, if one is unable to keep themselves from flatulating until they finish the Shema or to finish Tefillah, it's better that the time of Shema should pass and that they should skip prayer and should not pray, as opposed to praying with an unclean body. If the time of the prayer passes, that is considered, an ones is considered beyond one's control. And therefore one should pray twice the mincha prayer, the afternoon prayer. And if it appears that they could go ahead and control themselves from doing this, then they should put on tefillin between the blessing of Ahava and the Shema itself. And the Ramah adds, and say the blessing on them as well. So this is an interesting halakha over here. It sounds like this seems like a little bit overkill, but this is really important because we learned a couple of things from these rules here. So the Mishnah Berurah says that it's only if a person knows for a fact that they're having these issues. If they don't know they're having these issues, and they could keep themselves from doing this in the middle of prayer, then that's something different. Okay, so if a person is not sure about it, it's not really a concern. Okay. Also, when we say that he cannot control himself, okay, so if he were going to say that I could stop it from Kriya Shema and so on, it doesn't mean it gives him permission to go ahead and say any other blessings at that time. Okay. So the important thing is to try to control oneself for Shema and for Tefillah, and to make sure that that's all okay. Let's see. Does a woman with flatulence just return to prayer after it, regardless of the time due to her exemption? Yes, that's actually a good point. This would not be a similar requirement. So when she's able to control that urge, she could go ahead and pray at any time during the day. Because even though women are basically told to pray twice a day, women are not necessarily obligated in the time for prayer that is affixed as it is for men. So it's definitely not the same level of obligation. And also because most people don't hold that women have to pray twice a day in the required time period. So the Shulchan Aruch says that one should go ahead and let the time of Shema pass. However, most other later authorities that agree that one should not do that, because Kriya Shema is a Torah level mitzvah, and the actual source of this doesn't mention Kriya Shema as well. And we say also when we talked many moons ago, we haven't discussed this, but it was discussed in the laws of tefillin that one should try to go ahead and get their tefillin on as best they can. And it seems to be that based on the fact that by tefillin, if you can't be careful, then the Shema should also pass. So if we say let the whole day pass without putting on tefillin, then by extension the Shema should be that as well. Okay, so the Shulchan Aruch is really trying to say that some people who there are many people who try to get the Shema and Tefillah together at the proper time. The thing is that if you are not that type of person, then and you can't focus yourself, and you would just constantly be breaking wind for the entire length of your prayer, then you shouldn't be davening. However, if you could get Kriya Shema done by itself, that would be important. But you really should be able to do both, which is put on your tefillin and say Shema both at the same time. However, if you couldn't do both together, try to get one in, which is the Shema in its proper time, and with wearing tefillin, which is discussed in Lamed Ches. So the Ramah adds to say the blessing on the tefillin, and so you should make the blessing on the tefillin, Mishnah says, and then take them off. But you could keep your talis on and say the blessing on it, because this requirement of having a clean body is not the same for tzitzis. If you haven't put on tzitzis and your talis yet, and you get to the same spot, you should put it on without a bracha, because the wearing it is not a problem. So whereas putting on the tefillin, the mitzvah is done right then and there, and that would be a big break to wait and then say the blessings later. And this only applies for when you have some type of issue. Okay, either resulting from something you ate, or you're having some type of other issue. Okay, and then you could guard yourself to pray with a clean system. Okay, but if you regularly have an ailment that causes you to have this constant flatulence, okay, and if you don't try to find time to pray, you are never going to pray. So you should try to find a spot and a time when you could say the prayer where you can just get it by itself without having any type of odor or scent coming up to interrupt your prayer service. And so the thing is that you should also not try to eliminate Shema altogether as well. Okay, so if you are able to, if you're able to kind of time that when you're going to have this issue, and you can wait for the scent to pass, and then you can go ahead and recite it, that's how you should measure it out. Another suggestions made by the Pri Megadim, which is that if you have tefillin on, that there's no reason to say you should never ever wear tefillin. Okay, so you should be able to find a similar time where you should be able to put tefillin on as well. And so you can put them on, say the blessing, and then when you feel the urge, take them off immediately. Okay, so you can put them on. Maybe try to get in as much of the Shema as possible. So if you could say the blessings of Shema, and then you're probably going to have those urges, wait for them to pass. Quickly put on your tefillin, say the Shema as fast as you can, and then if you can go all the way through tefillah, great. If not, at least take off the tefillin and then continue with the rest of tefillah, waiting for the if you're continuing to flashlight, then wait for the scent to pass. Okay, and this is similar to like we mentioned earlier about someone who has bladder control problems, and urine constantly is not regulated through them, and they're constantly urinating on themselves, and they haven't gotten that corrected yet. So you need to go ahead and create some type of bandaging covering to keep yourself from leaking on your clothes. And this would also suffice. The Mishnah doesn't mention this, but this would also work if one was able to be catheterized. This mentioned in Nishmas Abraham over here as well. So if you were able to have those things available to you through modern medicine, it would solve all of these problems. All right, moving on to Siman 81. Thank you for going on that wonderful deep dive with me. We're moving on to 81. We're talking about excrement produced by a child. So a child that has basically reached the age that a similar child would be able to eat about an olive's worth of wheat, okay, in the amount of time that an adult would be able to consume a larger chunk of bread, then they are considered to have full-fledged excrement and full-fledged urine, and therefore you have to be careful of that. So if you're around little kids and they've soiled themselves somehow, you have to be concerned about that. Okay. Now this rule is only applying by children. If an adult, even if they've had for a very long time, if they have not eaten any grain products, that doesn't change their rule at all. This just sort of sets like a lower bar for what the youngest age is. Okay, which basically means that somewhere around 6 or 7. So, when we say also about having eaten grains, what this is to say, this is like an assumption. So, at the very least, you have to assume that by the time they reach a certain age, they've already started consuming regular grain products. And that even means that they've eaten it, even if they can only eat it through having it cooked, okay? Not just through bread products. However, if you know a child that has never been able to actually eat any grain products through some type of issue, then technically speaking, you have no obligation to worry about any excrement that comes out from them. Hopefully they're not 8 or 9 years old and still using diapers, but it's something to be concerned about. Okay, so that's assuming that they can't go ahead and eat any more grain products within that time period where one could eat a large chunk of bread. So it's about 5 minutes. Okay, so because the problem is that basically the body adjusts itself for disposing of food differently once one begins to eat grain products. And so many are lenient by a child if you know for a fact that they've never eaten any type of grain products, so they were aware of their sicknesses, and so on. However, one should always be strict and to stay away from any type of excrement, even for a child, because it's technically a Torah prohibition, and we should be strict on that. However, if it's entirely possible the child never ate and you went ahead and davened somewhere near it, b'diavad, you would fulfill your obligation. When we say he has to eat grain products, we mean the 5 species of grains, and that because those impact the way in which their excrement becomes sort of stinky. Something cooked that is made like an oatmeal. So even though a person could eat from that same thing, if it's large enough, then that's considered having eaten it, and that child would have to. You have to be worried about it. So some people think that the amount of time to eat is different amounts of time, but then the Mishnah goes through a long explanation over here saying that it should take about 5 minutes or so. And he also says that when there's little children around and they have diapers on, one should not be reciting the Shema or any other blessings anywhere near them, because they tend to not only soil themselves, they also tend to play in the dirt and the schmutz, and they get themselves and their clothing really disgusting. So therefore, little children, keep them away from davening places if they're filthy. Bring them in clean clothes, and make sure that they are clean when they are in shul. Now let's see over here. Okay. So we say that you have to stay away from their excrement, because the rules that we learned in the previous 5 chapters are all going to apply over here, and also from their urine. The meaning that this also means that if you just see them, there's the 2 levels of prohibition. There's the puddle where you can put water in it, or if they're actively urinating, which hopefully you don't have to watch that while you're davening. that's actually a big point. But if that did happen, you have to stop davening and wait for them to finish, then add the water to the urine. Okay, this is halacha beis here. This is if you were reciting it, and one of the children has basically left something, a little surprise for you, okay, in the form of some type of excrement. Okay, so you should walk far enough away to be able to throw it behind you for almost one total body length. If you're laying on the ground, you could throw it from feet to head, so about 6 feet away. If you can't get that far away, if you have something else in front of you, like some type of creek or river that could be in between the two of you, then you should step over that and put some distance between yourself and the excrement. However, you don't need to start over again. You just start from the place where you paused. And if you were in a place that, according to one opinion, if you were in a place that you should have been worried about these messes being there, you have to start over again. However, we learned earlier in Siman Ayin Vav, the Ramah points out, 76, that this is not the final halacha. You just go back to where you paused. The only question is whether or not you are being negligent in this. Okay, and so you have to be far enough away. The Mishnah explains that you could turn to the opposite direction and daven, even though you're not currently saying Shema Esrei, but you could be far enough away from it. And you also have to be at least far almost not only from it, but also from its smell as well. And crossing a creek should be fine, but you can't, because there's just not enough room for you to turn away from it altogether. Because otherwise, we learned previously that you could simply turn away from it and put it behind you. Okay, so what the two opinions in the Shulchan Aruch are talking about, the Mishnah explains, is whether or not you have to search your whole area to see if there's anything there. So if you don't see anything immediately, then you don't have to go digging around for it. However, if you know there's like little children there, then you're considered to be negligent, and you shouldn't have even started, and therefore you are punished with that. However, the later opinions are that say that you can be you don't have to be strict on this after the fact, and that you should only go back to the place where you paused, even if you should have known better. However, we said earlier in Siman 65 that if you pause long enough to finish the whole thing and there was no ones involved, you have to restart the whole thing over again. Let's see. Let's go through 82 as well. Okay, now what if the excrement dries out? There's two laws here, and we'll finish with this today. Okay, so dried excrement. So if it's so dry that if you were to throw it, it would break up in the air. That is considered dust, and therefore one can recite the Shema if it's there. It also doesn't have any smell to it as well. The Ramah adds, some say that it's not considered dirt unless it is can be ground up through being rolled in the air without being thrown, and that's what we say. So he required to be even more dry. So the Berurah explains that the dispute is whether it has to completely break up or if it just falls into a few pieces. Okay, so that's the dispute. Now, this does not include frozen excrement. So, however, it would be acceptable to spray if it was frozen so much that you can't smell anything. However, not everyone's so sure about that, so it's better to be strict and to walk away from it enough that that it's not anywhere near you. And once it gets warm again, it's going to come back and be disgusting. So, therefore, you should try to get away from it. And some people are actually really strict about this, and you have to repeat the whole davening over again. But at the very least, at the very least, to repeat Shema Esrei as a voluntary prayer. Now, what about if it's covered with ice? So that's like the rule we learned earlier in 76 about it covered with glass, so it will be fine. And for those who have no sense of smell, they just rely on vision, that's correct. Okay? However, it has to be a chunk of ice. It can't just be crystals or ice crystals. It has to be something that's covered. Okay? And like we learned. So covered with snow it also includes, as long as it's not melting snow. So we can really cover it so you can't even see it. Okay, and same thing too. If the urine becomes frozen, one can recite there. However, some people are strict. It's not so clear that you have to be strict on this one. Okay, last halacha, number 2 over here. If the urine becomes absorbed into the ground, but the ground is still moist, so then one should not recite. The Ramah says as well that some people even say that it's only when it is wet enough to wet something else, so it has to be somewhat collected liquid, and so he could rely on that to be lenient. The Mishnah says that, like we learned earlier, that it can be in the ground or absorbed in a garment, like a person who, for example, was having issues and it was dripping on themselves. It has to be wet enough, we say, to wet something else. Okay, and so that's the case. Even if you were to squeeze it slightly and would get moisture on it, then you have to add water to it. So the Ramah says that you can be relying on this, and all other later authorities agree with him. However, when you can't see them and they're only absorbed, you don't have to add water to it if they're not wet enough to wet something else. And then you have to just you don't need to add a full, you don't have to add a full revius to them. You have to just put a little bit of water on them. Okay, so that's the idea. Okay, and we learned that earlier in 77. Okay, so we are going to pause here, and we will pick up next time. We are quickly passing through the laws of Shema over here. We're going to learn about some other places. We're going to learn about some places. We're going to learn about the bathroom and the bathhouse and other places about reciting the Shema. What places are holy? So we're going to continue this discussion next time. Thank you for joining. Have a wonderful day. And please remember to like and subscribe.